Welcome to this Fireside Chat. I'm Thomas Wasson, and super excited to be welcoming on Lori Heino-Royer. She's the head of business development at Waabi, and we're talking a little bit about what's going on in the AV space. There's a lot of stuff going on with autonomous vehicles. It is a talk of the town, and I mean, moving ahead, it's going to be one of these things that can very much fundamentally alter the way the supply chain works. And so let's dive right in. First off, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences before coming over to Waabi.
Thanks, Thomas, for having me here. So I started my career in the trucking industry in the early 2000 timeframe with Daimler Truck, and I was there for nearly 20 years. Had all kinds of different roles. So I'm classically trained as a CPA and started in controlling for sales and marketing, and then ran back-end operations, ran PMO, did a lot of strategy and innovation, and then my last stint there was in connectivity. So kind of have seen a lot of different sides and have been there through the evolution of trucking is kind of this dirty thing to Trexie is now sexy and cool, and autonomous is the hottest thing out there.
Yeah.
So I joined Waabi just over 3 months ago, and I'm heading up commercialization, and I'm super excited to embark upon a time where something hasn't been done yet, and sort of figuring out how to do that is my passion.
Well, let's talk about figuring it out as well, because the AV space, there's a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of opportunities. And so for folks who may not know some of the stuff, these problems you're working through, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of challenges overall in the AV space. I think some of them come from multiple different angles. So if you start with the hardware, I think the first LiDAR that I bought was at Daimler was $75,000. And when you think that's not going to scale, that's not going to ever be available. And then the quality of those products was also very marginal. The consistency of the hardware is getting a lot better that's needed. The regulatory, there's still a lack of clarity, I'll say, sort of across the whole United States. There are human drivers that don't actually follow traffic law. There's all kinds of challenges that are in there. And so I think it's a matter of taking all of these different pieces and things and saying, how do we do something effectively with them on the technology side?
Yeah, and I'm excited about the tech because, you mentioned the hardware. They used to be giant assemblies, wrapping around the whole thing.
Yes.
And so looking ahead here as well, there's been a lot of events like F3. We've had elections, 2025. Some say the market's back. Who knows? But when we're looking at from the AV space,
yep.
Pivotal year in autonomous, what are some of the things that are making it such a important year?
Well, when I think back to 2017 and 2018, the question was, can we actually do it? Can we actually make the truck work autonomously? And as I look at 24 and 25, I think we're there. There are several companies that are running with a safety driver today, but the trucks are wholly operating in autonomous mode for the significant portions of those trips. And that's not a one-off anymore, that's pretty regular. And when you look at things like Waymo in San Francisco and going there and riding, when I first started riding in them in San Francisco, people got out of the way. Anybody on the street was running almost to get out of the way of a Waymo. And now the people are there in front of it and just walk right in front of the car, and they're so acclimated to it. And so I think that autonomous has arrived, and it's actually here now, but it's at its infancy. So it went through the stage of, is it going to be real? Now it's real, and it's going to start to scale, but it's going to take a long time to scale because the OEMs are part of it. The whole supply chain is so large, and to get all the pieces together to make it work and to give the additional hardware it takes to make it happen is still not scalable instantaneously.
I like to liken it like the Wright brothers. There's a Kitty Hawk, you have the first flight, but it took 10, 20 years for it to become fully commercialized, to fully see it deployed. With your experiences as well, coming from Daimler, being at Waabi now, was there ever a moment in the day-to-day that was a Kitty Hawk moment where hey, this thing just took off?
I think that the moment that you feel oh my God, this thing's really going to take off is your first ride in one. And my very first ride in one of the autonomous vehicles was very bumpy, very all over the place. You had to take possession of the vehicle several times. but you actually saw what was possible. And I remember going to a track, and it was a private course, and we were in an Uber vehicle, and I was sitting with some engineers who told me an unprotected left would never happen while the vehicle was making an unprotected left turn in autonomous mode. And I was like, okay, so some people believe, some people don't, but what I see is the technology actually working.
Seeing is believing almost.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that ties into as well the path to commercialization for Waabi as well. And so
Yes.
tell us a little about some of the steps. What's the pathway that we're looking forward right now?
So Waabi is looking at driver as a service. So the path that we're working to develop with the OEMs is much like how you could or order your own engine from your OEM. You will be able to select a driver, and there will probably be several that you can select from. And then there will be some sort of like per mile type charge for the services that Waabi offers once the vehicle is operating in autonomous mode. But we're never intending to actually buy our own vehicles, to compete, to run in that space. The vehicles that we have are for testing only, and so we have a very small testing fleet as well.
And I think that's so fascinating because it's going to fundamentally alter the supply chain. Having drivers on demand, drivers as a service, it's something they can just spin up as you need without all the extra assets and all the extra purchasing.
Correct.
And so checking into the partnerships and collabs, I've done a little bit over the years. I've heard from some have partnered with OEMs, some folks are developing it on their own. Let's talk about what kind of partnerships and collaborations are right now probably most important. What should we be looking for as we're evaluating this space? What are your thoughts?
Yep. So I think the partnerships overall in the entire supply chain industry are so required and needed. And then when you get into the specific of trucking, the fragmentation is even larger. And so nobody's able to sort of like make everything happen all on their own. And when I look at the autonomous space and a company like Waabi, what I see is that we're focused on the technology and bringing the technology to a point that is effective. What we're not expert at are the things that all the fleets have been doing for years. And so it becomes a little bit of how do we help you? What are the fleets looking for? How do we fit into what they're doing instead of saying we have to change everything? And I think of like Shelley's talk yesterday where she talked about, the handshake partnership that started intermodal. And when I think about autonomous, I think of intermodal, and I think about it like we're laying new railroad track, but it's actually lanes that already exist, but it's still gonna be somewhat limited for a long time. So it's almost like you can open that up, but those that are already operating in intermodal will have an easier transition to it than others.
Because they're already used to like this hub and spoke. I'm picking it up from somewhere, I'm taking it to another spot, and then there's going to be a handoff.
Right. And there will be, new things to deal with from the autonomous side. So with an autonomous vehicle, we need a launch and land spot. So we need to make sure that we stop it in a place that's safe. We need to be able to take off from a particular place that won't necessarily be like anywhere in the lot. So there will be some initial pieces around how that comes together. The CVSA requires a pre-trip inspection that's much more enhanced than a normal pre-trip inspection. So there are some things around it that will have to alter. And so just like any new form of business comes around, there are new things that have to be done with the autonomous space as well.
So it's almost like a truck airport. The truck comes in, you'll dock, you'll unload, and then with the pre and post trip, I'm assuming like if I was doing it, I'd have somebody come and check it out. Hey, you're good to go, and now you're cleared for flight, basically, and then they head out on their next load.
Yes.
And, is there, in your conversations as well, looking towards this path of commercialization, shippers, carriers, logistics providers, 3PLs, is there any kind of right now group or segment that appears to be most excited for in your conversations, or is it still in terms of working on handshake agreements, building it brick by brick?
I think there's multiple different areas. So I'm excited to see that some of the OEMs are currently working on redundant chassis. Yeah. And so that makes it so that the AV provider is really providing the external like hardware and then taking the interpretations from that hardware that come in and altering the software, but not necessarily having to then go ahead and also build the redundancy in the brakes, in the steering. Yeah. That's not necessarily the part that they're doing it in the initial phases, but in the long run, that's really should be the OEM space. So the OEM's working on those things. Fleets are becoming more interested. How do I learn more about it? What's out there? How do I educate myself? I see it's coming. I think it can help. I maybe have some ideas, but I'm not entirely sure exactly where it's at. And then I think that there's even other players that are out there, like truck stops, that can be launch and land spaces and can add, more spots to have a receiver location and really just bring things together. And so there's a lot of excitement around it, and now it's how do you turn that excitement into something actionable? And at Waabi, we're a very young company, so we started 3 years ago. So we're, I'll say, sort of like a second mover, and there's some certain advantages sort of like in seeing what was done before. And I would say like the biggest piece there that's interesting for us is the simulation that has been built. Really sort of like the truck goes out and it picks up all the information through the hardware, and it picks up a car and it's able to add it, and it's very real world looking. And once the car drives, we can have it drive anywhere. And the simulator does all of that on its own. So it's a Gen AI simulator that basically, as much as we want to spend on AWS, is how much simulation you can get. But that's what trains our Waabi driver. And so we run it through the simulator first, and then we go out on the road and we get real world miles behind it as well. And so what that does is it gives us even incremental safety by working out any of the details first within the simulator.
So it's like a double redundancy, but a double opportunity, because you're going to have that you're going to pre-try the route, and you probably, if you've seen any trucking simulators, drivers can be very unpredictable. And then you can cross-reference the after post-trip and then evaluate and see, we can add that to it's continuously reinforcing.
Right, and when we run it through the simulator, like, we don't have to put use cases in. It automatically creates all the use cases on its own, and it just continuously keeps doing it, which for me feels more real world. Like, I literally have a 16-year-old daughter who got her driver's license within the last month. And I look at the bar for training a human is like down here, and the bar for training technology is like way up here. And when I'm out there with her driving, what I saw was that, like, literally there are people everywhere that do not follow traffic rules. And so the hardest part about, like, building that technology is how do you handle all those maybe called edge cases, but they're really not edge, they're everyday driving.
It's like that long tail that's the stuff you really want to make sure everyone can get that first 80%, but that last 20% could be the make or break. And with trucking, you got to make sure it's always making sure you don't break anything.
Exactly.
And last question here, given advice for the audience looking at this new era of autonomy. I've been in the trucking sector and reported on it, and it's been everywhere from this is the coolest thing in the world to, oh my gosh, I'm going to be totally replaced by a robot overlord. What's some advice that you would give to folks in this space as we're making these transitions?
Yeah. So I would start with maybe some baseline education, like what is it really? I think it will change and evolve jobs. I don't think it's taking any jobs away. And I see, that the evolution of jobs happens as every new technology sort of comes on board. Even like people are talking about just basic chat GPT, but it's taking away the really hard, mundane pieces of the role. And I think that that's really what autonomous trucking is trying to do too. That it's really focused on that long haul stint first. And all the other pieces, and even like this, enhanced pre-trip inspection, we need people certified in that. And, those people go home every night and are not constantly on the road. So just educating yourself. And then from the fleet's perspective, I would say, share what it is you expect out of autonomous. So I hear all kinds of comments from, you're solving a problem I don't have, to it's the greatest thing ever and I can't wait to get into it. And I think just like every fleet has a different way that they operate and different things they focus on, the way that they interact with autonomous vehicles will be different every single time too, for every fleet. And so it's understanding what do you want out of it from your company.
Perfect. And if folks want to learn about Waabi, get in touch and continue to keep posted on your developments, what's the best way to find out?
They can absolutely reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn and happy to connect.
Lori, really appreciate your time. It's going to be super fun stuff, especially as we're moving ahead. They're going to be on the roads, and I'm really excited to see what y'all are going to be working on.
Great. Thanks, Thomas.
That's going to be a wrap for this Fireside Chat, but if you're just joining us, you can catch it on demand as well. Give them a look. The folks at Waabi, excellent stuff. That's it, but join us next time. We have a lot more great content coming right up.